So when you see animals split between male and female offspring, especially when times are really tough, it turns out that the reason why other animals do it is that the female child is a sure thing, meaning that females will almost always have grandchildren, almost always reproduce. Males, not so much. Sometimes they produce lots of grandchildren, but lots of times they produce zero. And where times are really tough, when you're going hungry, putting resources into the female is the wiser thing to do. And it turns out for people, we're doing the same thing. So when we had people read the story about tough economic times, and we asked them questions like, who do you think is going to have more children, your boy or your girl? They actually thought that the girl is more likely to produce children, which means that she's the one who's more likely to produce grandchildren. And at the end of the day, that's what evolution really counts, is the number of offspring you leave behind, not just in this generation, but the next and the next and the next. So what we did is we asked people to imagine that they have a boy and a girl, and we gave them some things to split between them, like they're creating a will, and said, well, how do you divide up your real estate? How do you divide your furniture, your other assets? And normally people divided them 50-50, 50 to the boy, but 50 to the girl. But for another group of people, we first had them read an article about the tough economic times in which we're living. So imagine how difficult it is to get jobs these days. Think of the last recession. It's very uncertain. And we found that after people had read that article and they were uncertain about finances, they started giving a little bit more money, a little bit more resources to the girl rather than the boy. So it went from being a 50-50 split closer to a 60-40 split.
For me, the most salient kind of takeaway for parents is, when we survey them, it's very clear that they want to be equal. They want to equally spend their resources. They have every intention of doing it. And so I think the first step to moving toward that goal is to realize that you have this bias, right? And so, if you really wanted to fix it as a parent, one way is to start tracking it more, to kind of keep track of how you're spending your money, where it's going. Because if you're just relying on your own kind of feelings for how you're allocating it, it's very likely this bias is going to seep in. And especially you need to do that when times are tougher, right? When you don't have money to kind of do everything. Times are tough, and I've really got to decide who am I going to spend the money on. That's when this would suggest that tracking is even more important if you really want to ensure that you're equally spending across your children. We see this too as part of a much bigger issue. I think there's this bigger question of, how do parents spend on their children? How do they make those decisions? What are the factors driving it? And frankly, we don't know a lot about it. There's actually very little research on the topic. There's a lot of research on individual consumers kind of buy for themselves. But I think there's a much bigger question of just this family decision unit and how those decisions are being made. And I see this as a start to understanding that. And we hope it spurs on a lot more work that looks at these kinds of questions that are so important.